Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started for real. I call these micro quizzes because I feel like they don't really even rise fully to the level of a proper quiz. And it's part attendance quiz, it's part check your understanding quiz. And as mentioned, you can retake these micro quizzes as many times as you need to, but it is meant to be your own personal check for understanding as well. If you have to take it if there's five, four choice questions and you have to take it, I don't know, 4 to the 5 times, or 5 to the 4 times, that's not great in terms of your current level of understanding. But if you got something wrong, you look back, you realize, oh, I didn't think about that. Let me do it again. That's fine. That's expected. I'm very happy for everyone to get a perfect score on all of these micro quizzes. Again, if it's taking you, 10, 15 minutes, you're still fine. You can still get the score you want, but maybe it's a time for you to kind of recalibrate a little bit where you're at in the course, where you're at in terms of keeping up with either in this case some kind of prior prerequisite material or going forward what will be kind of the trailing material of what we would have covered in the prior week's class. And speaking of which, where we left off on Tuesday, I think there's a lot of other things to cover in this topic of reconnaissance and footprinting. Just to kind of bring us back where we were, the whole idea was, what can we learn about an organization's security posture, potential source of vulnerabilities, via just effectively publicly available information. For the most part, on Tuesday, we were talking about things that are very kind of network specific. We'll do a little bit more about that, looking at DNS entries, trying to figure out what information is sort of required by spec to be provided in a DNS entry, and then also what other things one can learn and information can be learned via DNS entries. There were a few different websites as well as command lines for that, one of which provided more information than others. Another nice website I like to use is to really sort of analyze and automate the analysis of the actual technology underpinning an organization's website. That's not something that's necessarily doable in an absolute sense, but there's enough common frameworks in use that these tools exist that can determine, based on effectively the source code and some other things about a web presence, what kind of technology stack that particular organization happens to be using. This concept of a web spider, have you heard that term before? It is something that's in common use, even more so today than in prior years, used by search engines, other entities to kind of gather information they already sort of need to be able to return search results. Other web spiders are there to be able to provide that kind of software level information. Sometimes you can just yourself look at the HTML source code for a website, inspect a page, and figure out things that may or may not be useful. Probably not for larger organizations, but one never knows. There's all sorts of development flows for websites that can inadvertently leak information through the source code for that website. One resource I like to use is the Netcraft Web Spider. First off, sometimes I use it if I'm just sort of curious about a website. I say, well, that's an interesting website. To what extent can I determine how they went ahead and built that website? Or just to, in this context of cybersecurity, just attempting to understand a little bit more of the underlying technology stack. That could then lead us in the next direction for what kind of vulnerabilities we'd want to look for, which tend to be specific to those technology stacks. Does anyone know what web framework iastate.edu uses? Is anyone on the web dev team? You've never wondered. We have this amazing website that I'm sure you go to on a daily basis. Well, we don't have to guess. We can go to Netcraft and go ask for its report, its site report on iastate.edu. That's a little small for you, perhaps, that font that's returned. It is going to return some of the basic who is the DNS type network registration information that we already talked a little bit about on Tuesday. There's quite a bit of information about the email attempts to kind of provide trust in email sending systems. So there's DMARC and things like that that we won't really even talk about in this class. It analyzes the JavaScript on the page to get a feel for what kind of analytics or other trackers may be encoded there. You will almost not find a website that doesn't have Google Analytics embedded in it these days. It's able to determine, I think, through IP address ranges. I don't know how else it would be able to determine what kind of cloud platform it's using. So the claim is that iastate.edu is using Windows Azure. If we looked at that IP address, I think we looked at University of Iowa on Tuesday, and we said that was Amazon East. This one is Microsoft Chicago. So it is using different technologies between the institutions. Windows Azure, sort of the cloud hosting. Apache is the web server that it's using. It's nice that it's using SSL. JavaScript isn't that interesting. And the actual sort of content management system, or how do they update their website, they're using Drupal for that. That is a piece of information that, at least based on polling of the class, you didn't know before right now, and now that you know. iastate.edu, at least just the top level, iastate.edu is using Drupal. If there's a vulnerability in Drupal, there may be a vulnerability in iastate.edu, or at the very least, you know where to start looking if one was interested in exploring potential weaknesses in that web, in the top level website. It's interesting to note that it's going to be potentially website per website or subdomain per subdomain. So that was iastate.edu. This is www.ece.iastate.edu. I guess one would think potentially that if the top level organization was using a technology stack, that the underlying organizations would also use the same technology stack. It could be the case. Well, of course, for-profit private companies are this way as well. But again, as I talked about a little bit on Tuesday, academic organizations may be a little bit unique in that there's a little bit more independence between the individual units in a university versus at a company. But even in a larger company that was formed and grown through mergers and acquisitions and things like that, there may be a whole set of different technology stacks in use within a single company. Same web hosting platform. But if we were to look at the content management system here, it's not using Drupal. It's using kind of the next main competitor. It's using WordPress instead. So again, your WordPress install may be nice and secure, but it's probably WordPress with 8,000 additional kind of add-ins, plugins added on top of it. It's potentially the case that if any one of those has some vulnerability, then ece.iastate.edu is also potentially vulnerable. I think it's good to be curious about the technology you're using on a daily basis, independent of the pen testing, ethical hacking environment. Understanding what is being used by the websites that you visit, I think the applications that you download and use, I think can also help you make you a more conscientious consumer of technology as well. This is just one tool amongst many to allow you to kind of, at a very high level, reverse engineer a website to figure out potentially what's going on. We can also probably figure out some of that, like I mentioned, just via, and I apologize if that picture is any of you, just via just looking at the source code for it as well. There's all sorts of reasons one may want to review the source code. There's all sorts of developer consoles. You can also just click, inspect, which is effectively looking at the source code for it. And it is possible just by looking at that, we might be able to figure out specifically what technology stack, not the hosting side, but the content management side. And I guess it's one of those things that you start to recognize if you do it enough times. The body of this page has a whole bunch of tagged classes associated with it, and they're all very WordPress specific. So even if Netcraft didn't exist, at least for ece.iastate.edu, yeah, we can kind of figure out what they're using, how they're posting updates to that website. This idea of spidering a website, which things like search engines and other tools are using to gather information to be able to return results, is related, but not exactly the same thing as mirroring a website. And there are all sorts of reasons we may want to locally mirror a website. Effectively, create a local copy of a website so that we can explore it without having to be actually directly connecting to that web server. That's actually something that, even as technology is advanced, it's actually a little bit harder to do these days than perhaps it used to. As websites become less repositories of static content and much more just software applications in their own right, It's not impossible, but it's actually more challenging than in prior generations to be able to do such a thing. But it can be very useful if you really want to understand what's happening on ece.iastate.edu. You would attempt to provide a local mirror for that, and then you have your own local playground where you can change things, break things, and see what happens in that particular website. We'll make use of what's known as the Social Engineering Toolkit in Lab 8, much later in the semester, to basically clone a website for sort of a social engineering, a fake version of that website. There was a time you could just say download website, and that would do all you would need to do because it was just some HTML, maybe a little bit of JavaScript and some images. And now, as these things are more complicated web frameworks, it's not as simple as it used to be. The most modern current tools effectively browse the website as a user to attempt to do that cloning of a website with varying levels of success with modern websites. Other ways we can discover system information is not to look at how the website looks today, but how the website looked in the past. Has anyone here, I hope it's everyone, but you never know, has anyone here used archive.org before? A handful of you, 40%. And if you're in the back of the room, I never expect you to raise your hand, so that's fine. I'm not counting you in my sample. The Wayback Machine, maybe you've heard, I just think of it as archive.org, but yeah, it is way more than just the Wayback Machine these days, but its original intended purpose was to cache websites, to keep historical snapshots of websites, to see what things used to look like. And so the thought process here would be, well, a couple things, right? Again, we can go to the website today to see what the technology stack is today, but we can potentially learn a lot of things about how the website used to look in the past. And this Wayback Machine has been around for quite a while, almost as old as the public World Wide Web itself. And so you can actually, for some of these sites, go quite a bit further back. You can imagine a scenario in which there was some version of an organization's website where today it's perfectly fine, but 5 years ago they accidentally published some information they really shouldn't have. And if they're not sufficiently savvy with regards to interfacing with the Internet Archive, perhaps that information is actually still there in that cached, in that kind of snapshotted form. So today's website is great, no information leakage, but 5 years ago things were quite different. And you look at that and you may learn some things via going through the Wayback Machine. They tend to be a pretty good actor in terms of respecting requests to not cache certain things or remove certain things. But kind of by default, they are continually trawling the entire World Wide Web and trying to cache these websites. I went back and looked at our own department website, the same one we just went to, ece.iastate.edu. I guess I'm getting old because I look at the 1995 version of ece.iastate.edu. And I feel like it's okay. I don't know. I feel like it still has all the information you need on the website. Yes, it's kind of old school HTML, and we still sort of use that logo anyway. I think it's fine, actually. So I don't know. It's interesting to me that all these web frameworks change. The way we develop the web is significantly different than what it would have been 30 plus years ago now. The website's pretty good still. I don't know. It probably loads a lot faster, too. I haven't tried to time what the equivalent of that website was. I tried to look at who had personal websites back in 1995. That is, in fact, before my time here. I was able to find our beloved Professor Jacobson. And, of course, he had a pretty nice-looking website even back then, because he might have been the very first. I don't know. So the archive's pretty interesting for that reason. You can really look to see what did things look like back in the day. I guess it could be a nostalgia trip down memory lane if you want to think of it that way. But separately, it's, okay, what was the technology underlying that website? I do have it open here. We can actually go and check it out. Again, archive.org is more than just archiving of websites these days. They attempt to also be a hosting for just beyond World Wide Web information, but the internet writ large with varying levels of success. Books, audio, things like that, historical records. So you can actually get a little lost depending on what your goals are. You go to archive.org, the Wayback Machine is that very first box that you have there. let's not do iastate.edu. I already did. Let's do zambrino.com, everyone's favorite website. I don't know what it'll find. Okay, so it found zambrino.com. Let's see what it has for a snapshot and see what information I am leaking on zambrino.com. So this is kind of a something of like a histogram view, or just what snapshots it has in its system. The algorithm for when it does these snapshots is not that clear to me. Could be based on popularity, could be a random search, could be based on user requests. I don't actually know when it determines that a new snapshot is necessary. Whether it requires a change in the snapshot, or if it's just from the user's perspective relatively random when it happens. Let's click on zambrino.com. And we get an interesting first result, actually, right? So we go to zambrino.com. We get a HTTP 302, which is a redirect. We get an HTTP redirect to this website. We get another HTTP 301 to actually go here, and it looks like something might be confused about all the redirects. Well, we actually do learn a little bit about what's happening there when we attempt to look at the archive for zambrino.com, in that, well, A, it's having a little bit of problems, but that redirect actually shares a little bit of maybe unintended information about like the storage hierarchy of that website and where individual websites at iastate.edu are being hosted. So I probably knew that, but I guess otherwise we've learned something we didn't otherwise know. 1 second here. Okay, I think we're still good. Let's go back to that. Let's look further back. So that didn't really tell us all that much. That was not what, that was the web search. We actually want to do the actual Wayback Machine. That was just a web search. Let's go back here. Try that again. Did I just type in the name and not the .com potentially? Yes. I decided after Tuesday I should stop looking at people I don't know when demoing some of these tools. So everything will be very Zambrino centric. It's not a common name. So if you see something with Zambrino, talk about sharing unnecessary information, if it's not me, it's somewhat quite closely related to me. So now we go all the way back to 2013. Now we can look at what was zambrino.com back in 2013, and it's just a generic WordPress site. This was the Zambrino family, just another WordPress site. That was not my website. That was, I think, a cousin who just sat on the domain for a very long time and just squatted on it. Then let's see what happened in 2021. We have a snapshot here. And that was a redirect to PHP page. Let's see if the redirect actually works this time. It's going slowly. So at some point, my cousin dropped the domain and somebody else squatted on the domain. This is a risky click. Okay, but it's fine. It's just Guancheng Liangshang Food Company. What do they make? They make white lotus seeds and products from white lotus seeds. So that was what Zambrino.com was for a period of time. Could just be a business model in which any domain that's expired, that's sufficiently inexpensive, gets snapped up, and then they squat at it in the hope that there's some money to be made there. So for a while that was Zambrino.com. That doesn't really tell me that much, other than it has changed significantly over time, and apparently I was a food importer for a period of time. Have fun with the Internet Archive Wayback Machine if you haven't done so. Do it this evening. All sorts of other, maybe more modern approaches to discover organizational information. I did mention this briefly on Tuesday. I think it's actually less and less the case that organizations still have publicly searchable directories. I think it probably just for, if not just sort of privacy considerations, security considerations themselves of, well, why are we providing this information to the public writ large versus just sort of an internal accessible, publicly searchable directories. And it's possible that again, I keep talking about academic organizations, that we are maybe some of the last to actually provide a find a person directory link to be able to find contact information. I think for the most part, student information wouldn't be in there, but you'd have to double check with your own information. But for instance, I put in my last name, and if someone is really unhappy with me because of some comment I posted online, it happens. I guess they know where to find me and how to reach my phone and my email address here. So this is an example of a publicly accessible directory. It's less and less common. What is more and more common is the fact that whether at an organizational level or just as an individual level associated with an organization, social media, specifically for, company or information, people working for private industry and things like that. Your LinkedIn is a pretty good example. Just being able to kind of recreate effectively the social network of an organization can be a very useful thing. Again, we'll talk more about social engineering later in this semester, which can be a technical topic, but this could be a good starting point for it. There are all sorts of tools with limited kind of success in terms of keeping up with technology that allow you to kind of do that in a more automated fashion. If you look at the OSINT pages that we talked about on Tuesday, you'll find all sorts of tools that say, give me a name or a company, I'll go into LinkedIn for you and attempt to kind of redraw the network graph of who works at that organization. You take any large organization, and a pretty high percentage of the employees, certainly in more technical fields, are going to be on LinkedIn these days. That may or may not then be an avenue for learning information that the company individually is fine with having be available, but maybe in the aggregate could provide some view of the organization that they may or may not want. Another very useful thing potentially are username search tools. That's another just OSINT tool there. That would be useful in the case of just username reuse. So if you are aware of someone's username in one context, and perhaps at iastate.edu, everything is really well secured. We use 17-factor authentication. I have to check my phone every single time I want to log in. But if that username is being reused somewhere else that doesn't have those policies, and if I'm potentially silly enough to kind of reuse my authentication ability across different sites, then those username search tools can actually reveal quite a bit about someone. That probably depends on the how common a name is, I guess I would say. So I already mentioned this. Another risky type. We put in Zambrino. Again, I already kind of hinted, if you see a Zambrino, it is me or a friend of me, a close relative. Choose all the beds. Help me out, help me out. That's a bed, right? That's a pull-out couch. I'm going to call it a bed. Nice try. That is a purse. Here's a bed, bed, bed. Nice try, CAPTCHA. Okay. And all this is doing is, I think it's just taking known databases of usernames. It says it's doing a search. I think it's just a local search of previously kind of captured data and determining where the username with, in this case, I didn't say to do any sort of regular expression matching or permutation of just, I think it's an exact match of username Zambrino. As this comes up, I cannot confirm nor deny which of these are mine. I have children, I have cousins, I have relatives. Anything inappropriate here is absolutely not me. Don't know what calendaring website is probably okay. That could be me. Duolingo, I got to keep up on my French skills. GitHub is almost certainly me. Could be me. I don't know. If it is, I have a very low rank. Replic's probably me. Snapchat is probably not me. And so on. TikTok is almost certainly not me. Trello is probably, anyway, so you can learn a lot about someone just by doing that username search. Hit me up on Snapchat afterwards. Or whoever username Zambrino is. It's interesting. And again, I would never want to do this with a username that was not, associated with me. You learn a little bit about someone. Certainly if they have a unique name. I'm sure if it was J Smith1 or something, it would be a lot of noise in that data. In this case, with a more unique username, that does provide some sort of information leakage about someone that maybe you're aware of, again, for individual cases, right? If you do a Google search, you're going to find some of this information as well. But sort of in the aggregate, this starts to paint a picture of someone. Now we may know someone's hobbies. Here's someone who is a coder, who is learning another language, who um, likes to keep a calendar. I don't know, learn some information about that person that could be used to kind of step into scaffold additional attacks here. You can also learn things about job postings of an organization as well. Now, it's possible that like a Netcraft view, although it's very website specific, tells you a lot about the technology posture of our organization, but job postings can also very much do that as well. There you're looking at Indeed, and there's tools for that. LinkedIn as well, of course, for that. I was going to do, and I think I have the website open here. Well, this is the University of Iowa Jobs website. The issue with doing that kind of live in class is I can look and see, is there any like technology? Are there any people who have Linux hiring needs? Well, that'll tell me something, right? Depending on how specific that job posting is. We're looking for someone with this particular Linux background to handle this set of tasks. That tells me something that otherwise wouldn't necessarily be public knowledge about what the use of technology is at that organization. The downside of doing this at Iowa State University or University of Iowa's, budgets being what they are, we're not hiring a lot of people right now, so you're not going to see a lot of entries today. But there is one person who requires Linux expertise being hired at the University of Iowa. Consider it if those of you who are closer to graduation. This looks more like a research support role than an IT support role. But somewhere in here, there's an expectation that there's a particular Linux background may require an actual search, just experience with Linux command line tools. So at least for that requirement, at the end of this semester, you're all sufficiently qualified for that job. I can't speak to the other qualifications, but just fake it until you make it. Using search engines in general, you've already seen me doing a little bit of that, can be more powerful than you think. And I kind of joke that someone who calls himself sort of an OS int expert is really just better at using Google than the median user. And there's actually still some truth to that. It was a joke, but there's a kernel of truth to that really being able to carefully tailor your searches really allows you to find the information that you need and kind of discard just the wide amount of unnecessary things here. The term has been called Google hacking, and as an overloaded word, it's not very useful here. The other term I've heard called is Google dorking, and I tried to determine the etymology of it. It's just a term someone came up with. So I don't like either of those tools. Advanced Googling, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, using less publicized feature of Google, and really that's just an example. Most search engines, and that's just web crawling search engines and the type of search boxes we were using just for those tools, tend to allow for very similar kind of sub-targeting of resources. By default, we use Google and we put in a keyword, right? We say, I want to look for SciB 2310 at Iowa State University. That is fine. It's probably a specific enough search. You're going to get what you need, if not on the first page, on the second page of results. Of course, these days you'll get some Gemini AI result, which may or may not be what you need at the end of the day. But there's a lot more capabilities than that. So there's extra functionality to request very specific sub-filtering of results that can lead you from having maybe 2 million results for a search term to just 15 results for a search term that may or may not be useful for your case. The term is called Google hacking or Google dorking, so it is still kind of specific to Google, but it doesn't have to be. And what the way things have been going is Google has actually been starting to kind of de-emphasize, if not directly removing some of that functionality, because I don't know if they want people to be really interacting with their search like that. They'd much rather you're chatting with their chatbot instead. The other thing we will see as we look to either of those two sites, the Google hacking database, is there is a little bit of an arms race with regards to that. When we find and someone else finds a really well manicured search term that leads to some interesting results, depending on what is found in those results, the next step is someone informs Google, or they're themselves performing these kind of searches, and then they explicitly de-index those results so that at least using this search engine, it doesn't serve its purposes, but there are other search engines. So that page that I have screenshotted on the right is the Google Advanced Search site. I actually don't use it all that much. Where is it? I have it open here. I don't actually use it all that much. This is just google.com/advanced search, because I think for any one of these things you put in where you're trying to narrow it in certain ways. So this is the keywords, this is language, region, site, domain. You can do all those without actually having to use this page, just via certain ways of phrasing things. So for example, here are some of the search strings that one can use. And if this is obvious, if you do this all the time, more power to you. Probably just make you a more effective web user versus needing this for cybersecurity purposes. I can specify site:/iastate.edu, and it's going to search only the domain iastate.edu. I personally use that feature all the time. A grad student comes to me and says, Professor Zambrino, when are the deadlines to submit this particular form on Workday? I can find it. Let me find it. Let me find that for you. Okay, yeah, so I need to find what that form is and what the deadline is. God, I still don't even know where to start. Okay, it's probably under academics, and this is a graduate student asking me the question. Probably click on graduate college next. That doesn't look much better. And this is the same link, so I probably have to now scroll down. Nope. I need to find a date. Nope. So, kind of awful. I still can't find it. So what do I do instead? You don't have to go to, again, you can do it in the search bar. I need to find, graduate college deadlines. You could type in Iowa State, or you say just find whatever is available on iastate.edu. Impossible. Well, possible. I spelled it wrong. And there it is. Actually, there it is. Where is it? Nope. That is events and deadlines. Well, close enough. Assume I found what I needed to. Current students, I need important deadlines. That would be the link I would need. But I went from kind of just hopelessly trawling the website. I still can't find it. At some point, that's their problem and not my problem if I still can't find that exact piece of information I'm looking for. I had to keep scrolling. That looked like, and there it is. So if you're a master's student in the creative component, that now links to a SciBox file, which you would never be able to memorize that link, and it changes quite frequently as well. And finally, I have the dates that the student needs to be able to do what they need to do. So independent of the usage for finding very specific information about an organization, just getting around Iowa State's website might be easier via just search strings versus attempting to click everywhere you go. So I use that one all the time, independent of this context. I use file type all the time as well. If I know that the results I'm looking for are going to be a PDF file, you can limit your search results to PDF files. You can ask for things that have things in the URL or things that are in the title, and you can do some basic regular expression style matching so it doesn't have to be an exact match. Combining some of those techniques, you get some interesting results. And I can click on this example, so we can kind of maybe try to guess what's happening here. In text, meaning in the text of the page, kind of a default. AWS access key ID, that's a logical or AWS secret access key, file type JSON, or a file type YAML. So what is that search trying to look for? Again, you don't have to literally know it word by word, but we can squint at it. What do we think that search is looking for? Sure. In this, yeah, API keys or just access keys to AWS, absolutely. Now, I had mentioned, this is a fun one, this is the kind of thing that will get de-indexed pretty quickly. So I will click it. That's an example of how one can use it. I will click it, but I don't think I'm going to find too many, because probably when I first would have done that, you'd find some examples, but it's unlikely I will actually find a match for that. Let's just click randomly. Let's go further. Because it's certainly not good practices to actually provide that information. Not seeing any, at least on the first couple of pages here. So again, you can't expect to get instantaneous great results the first time you try things. What I would like you to do, and in just a second I will pause the video here so we don't have to have kind of the dead space here. I'd like us to go to that exploit database. So that link was on slide 12 here. So the Google hacking database. This is the URL if you need to be able to look it up yourself. I'd like you to take a few minutes with the person next to you, the people around you, just one person with a computer is fine, and see what you can find. We can try some of these. Really, all you're doing is you're clicking it, and it's going to do the Google. You may have to manually do it, click twice. It's going to do the actual search for you. So again, probably the first couple links aren't necessarily correct, but in this case, this is someone's OpenSSH private key. But probably not. That's way too obvious of a result there. So go to that website. It's ExploitDB. You'll be going to that site quite a bit this semester. I don't have much guidance for you other than just don't click on the first page. Just click around. See what's been publicly posted there about what are some of the interesting things one can put into Google when we have a more carefully tailored search. And then I'm going to ask each group to report out. So if it's two of you, that's fine. One of you report out. All you say is which one did you click on or what was the search string you did, and we're going to try it live in front of class. So let's leave things as a pause right here, and we'll come back to this in just a minute. So it does sound like some of you might be able to have some fun continuing this exercise offline, but for now, in just the 2 minutes we have remaining, looking for a couple volunteers. Did anyone find anything interesting they'd like to share with me and with the rest of the class? Well, let's circle back here, and then we'll see what we can share back out. So, sure, what did you find?
Private SSH keys on GitHub.
So this first link here, right? And that is also a policy choice that has changed relatively recently that I don't think GitHub would let you do that anymore. That they scan your commits for things like secret keys, at least the most common ones, and I'm pretty sure they would not, in fact, let you do that today. So that was a Google search for SSH for private repo access. This one, I just don't know. So how many of these are actually legitimate posted private SSH keys? I'm not sure. There's no easy way to find out other than to attempt to connect to those things. Other things that we found. And we can just click some of these, but other things that we found. We only have a minute or so left here today. Volunteers? Sure.
A lot of maybe just open web servers that have like exposed directories, like parent directories that we should be.
Absolutely. Did you have an example of a string that found it?
I found the password one from Purdue, and it showed like a parent directory of a lot of old like cybersecurity stuff.
Okay. So it's like directory listing. I do like these things that look for really specific files that, I haven't clicked it. Site edu, so assuming that universities don't know what they're doing. File type XLS, so like spreadsheet, and something with the word root and also database. Again, if you assume that all of your opponents are really mature, you're probably not going to be able to find anything. But the truth is, lots of people who are using the web, certainly in an academic environment, are not going to be that mature. That seems bad. I have to be a little careful clicking on any of these. Any other examples? We have time for one more example that somebody found. The last one I had listed here was in URL tsweb default.htm. That one, as far as I can tell, still kind of works. That is web interface for remote desktop connection to some particular machine at the University of Oklahoma, for which the security of the login, in fact, may not be that great itself. I can tell you're enjoying that a little bit. You can continue to do it offline, but for now, we'll end this for today, and we'll see everyone next week. Good luck for those of you who haven't done Lab 1 yet. Seems like it's going okay. Real things get going next week.